The courtroom of Judge Judy is a place where small disputes turn into major life lessons, and today's session begins with a very complicated case involving a landlord and a former tenant. The landlord is a woman who took pride in her property, while the tenant is a young man who lived there for 2 years. As the case opens, the landlord is visibly upset, holding a stack of color photographs that show the state of the apartment after the tenant moved out. She is suing for $3,000, which covers unpaid rent, professional cleaning services, and repairs for what she describes as malicious damage. Judge Judy begins by looking at the move-in inspection report, a document that is crucial in any rental dispute. She asks the tenant if he signed this document 2 years ago, and he admits that he did. This means the tenant officially agreed that the apartment was in perfect condition when he first took the keys. However, the photos taken on the day he left show a complete disaster. There are deep holes in the drywall that look like they were made by a hammer or a fist. There are dark stains on the carpet that suggest liquid was spilled and left to rot for months. Even the kitchen appliances, which were brand new when he moved in, are covered in thick grease and grime. The tenant tries to defend himself by saying that this is just normal wear and tear that happens when someone lives in a space for a long time. Judge Judy stops him immediately with a sharp look. She explains to him that normal wear and tear includes things like slight scuff marks on the floor or fading paint near a window. It does not include broken doors, shattered light fixtures, or trash piled up in the corners of the rooms. The tenant then tries a different tactic, claiming that the landlord never came to fix a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink, which caused mold to grow. Judge Judy asks the most important legal question. Did you ever give her a written notice about this leak? The tenant stammers and says he told her over the phone once. The judge sighs and explains that, in a court of law, a phone call is almost impossible to prove. Without a letter, an email, or a text message, the tenant has no proof that he ever complained. Because he stayed in the apartment and continued to use the water, he is legally responsible for the rent. The judge rules that the landlord can keep the security deposit and that the tenant must pay an additional $2,000 to cover the professional contractors needed to make the home livable again. The next case moves from a house to a friendship that has completely fallen apart over money. A young woman named Sarah is suing her former best friend Megan for $1,500. Sarah explains that 6 months ago, Megan was in a desperate situation. Her car had broken down and she couldn't get to work. Without a car, Megan was going to lose her job, so Sarah decided to help her out. She went to the bank, withdrew $1,500 from her savings, and handed it to Megan. At the time, they were best friends who shared everything, so they didn't sign a formal contract. However, as soon as the car was fixed, Megan's behavior changed. She stopped inviting Sarah out, she took hours to reply to text messages, and eventually, she blocked Sarah on all social media platforms. When Sarah finally asked for her money back, Megan told her that she thought the money was a gift because they were such close friends. Judge Judy looks at Megan and asks her point blank, "Why would someone give you $1,500 for free?" Megan tries to argue that Sarah was wealthy and didn't need the money, but the judge quickly shuts that down. Wealth has nothing to do with a debt. Sarah then produces a series of text messages from 4 months ago. In one of the messages, Megan wrote, "Thank you so much for the help. I will start paying you back $50 a week as soon as I get my next paycheck." This single text message is the smoking gun of the case. It proves that both parties understood the money was a loan, not a gift. Judge Judy lectures Megan about how she traded a 10-year friendship for a small amount of money and warns her that she will find it very hard to find someone as kind as Sarah in the future. The judgment is for the full $1,500, plus the court costs that Sarah had to pay to file the case. The third case is about a used car sale gone wrong, which is a very common issue in Judge Judy's court. A man bought a 10-year-old SUV from a private seller for $4,000. He drove it for exactly 3 days before the transmission completely failed, leaving him stranded on the side of the highway. He is now suing the seller for a full refund, claiming that the seller lied about the car's condition. The buyer is very emotional, saying that he saved up for a year to buy this car for his growing family. However, Judge Judy has to explain the law of as-is sales. In most states, when you buy a car from a private individual, there is no implied warranty. This means the moment you hand over the cash and take the title, the car is your responsibility, regardless of what happens next. The only way the buyer could win is if he could prove that the seller knew the transmission was failing and purposefully hid that fact. The seller stands up and says that the car was his daily driver and he never had a single problem with it. He says the buyer took it for a test drive and said it felt great. Judge Judy asks the buyer if he took the car to a professional mechanic for a pre-purchase inspection. The buyer hangs his head and says no, he just trusted the seller's word. The judge explains that while it is a sad situation, the buyer made a huge mistake. A car is a complex machine and things can break at any moment without warning. Since the buyer has no proof of fraud or a written guarantee, the judge cannot force the seller to give the money back. She tells the buyer that this is a $4,000 lesson in doing your homework before spending your hard-earned money. The final case involves two former roommates who are fighting over a shared credit card. They lived together for a year and decided to put all their shared expenses, like groceries, internet, and utilities, on one card to make things easier. However, after they moved out, one roommate discovered that there were thousands of dollars in charges for things that were definitely not shared. There were charges for high-end clothing stores, expensive dinners at five-star restaurants, and even a trip to a theme park that only one of them attended. The defendant tries to argue that they had an agreement to live well and that the other roommate knew about these charges. But when Judge Judy asks for proof of this agreement, the defendant has nothing. The judge goes through the statements month by month, highlighting every charge that was not a basic necessity for the household. She totals up the unauthorized spending and orders the defendant to pay it all back.